Welcome to the Veil of Truth, your gateway to uncovering hidden insights and illuminating mysteries. I'm thrilled you've joined our global community. Whether you're watching from a bustling city skyline or a quiet countryside, we're glad you're here. Globe showing Europe, Africa, so tell me, where are you tuning in from today? Chapter 1, An Invitation in Music. Hercule Poirot, seated in his perfectly ordered Parisian sitting room, enjoyed the small ritual of his morning coffee, precisely 2 spoons of sugar, milk warmed to the ideal temperature, and the faint aroma of freshly baked croissants wafting from the nearby bakery. Yet even amid such domestic perfection, the detective's serene routine was not immune to the unexpected. The postman's knock, a precise, rhythmic rap, brought with it a cream envelope, sealed with a crimson wax stamp. Poirot regarded it with mild suspicion. Surprises, he knew, were most often nuisances, occasionally disasters, and sometimes the calling card of a mystery most delectable. Carefully, he drew his silver letter knife, opening the envelope with an elegance that mirrored his well-practiced grace. Inside lay a single sheet of fine stationery, written in an impeccable hand. Monsieur Hercule Poirot. The Harmony Conservatory, situated in the serene countryside of Wiltshire, requests your presence to ensure fairness and decorum during the upcoming violin scholarship competition. Your reputation for discernment and discretion precedes you. With respect, Madame Claudine D'Artois, Director. Poirot's dark eye sparkled behind their precise spectacles. A music academy, he noted, was a most unusual stage for his talents, but never had he refused a summons that promised subtlety, challenge, and the examination of the human psyche. Within the hour, arrangements had been made. A sleek motorcar awaited him at the station, polished to reflect the early morning sun. Poirot settled into the leather seat, cravat impeccably in place, hands folded neatly, his gaze fixed on the passing countryside. He mused aloud to his ever-loyal companion, Captain Hastings, who sat opposite, hat slightly askew, and a notepad at the ready. Mon ami, Poirot began, his voice carrying the same gentle insistence he reserved for particularly delicate observations. A musical competition may appear, on the surface, merely a display of technical skill. But consider the mind, the heart, the jealousies. You will find, Captain, that even the sweetest sonata may conceal bitter motives. And where human ambition dances, suspicion is never far behind. Hastings nodded, his admiration for Poirot's perceptive genius mingled with a touch of exasperation at the detective's unyielding attention to the psychological landscape. The Harmony Conservatory rose before them, a grand edifice of cream stone, its tall windows reflecting the morning light like polished instruments. Ivy clung to the facades in deliberate patterns, giving the impression of a venerable institution untouched by triviality or disorder. Poirot's sharp gaze noted every detail, the slightly uneven stonework of the entrance, the worn brass handle of the door, and the subtle scent of varnished wood that hinted at countless hours of rehearsal and performance. Madame Claudine D'Artois herself appeared in the doorway, a woman of commanding presence, her silver hair pinned in an elegant chignon, and eyes that suggested intelligence tempered with exacting standards. She approached with a poised smile. Monsieur Poirot, how gracious of you to accept our invitation, she said, inclining her head. I trust your journey was comfortable. Madam, Poirot replied, bowing slightly, comfortable indeed. The journey affords one the opportunity to observe the landscape, the behavior of fellow passengers, the way the sun reflects on a river. All are lessons, subtle yet instructive. Madame d'Artois raised an eyebrow, half amused, half intrigued. I am certain our students will benefit from your attention to detail. Poirot's eye sparkled. But the detail is always in the human heart, madam. It is the trembling of a hand, the avoidance of a gaze, that tells the truth more clearly than words or music ever can. They entered the main hall, where a high ceiling echoed faintly with the soft sounds of scales being practiced. Students moved gracefully about the polished floor, their expressions a mixture of concentration and anxiety. The instruments gleamed under the sunlight streaming through the tall windows, violins of various hues, some ancient and revered, others new and promising. At the center, encased in a glass display, rested the pièce de résistance, a Stradivarius, its varnish catching every ray of light, every reflection a tiny explosion of gold and amber. Poirot studied the young musicians carefully. Each bore a different expression, one nervous, fingers trembling slightly as they tuned their instruments, another confident, standing tall, shoulders squared as if daring anyone to question their skill, yet another, pale and withdrawn, avoiding the eyes of peers with the careful air of one who knows secrets too delicate to be spoken aloud. A diverse company, Poirot murmured. Observe, Hastings. Here, envy. There, pride. And in the corner, the sweet shadow of fear. Hastings scribbled in his notebook. You can tell all that just by looking at them. Mon ami, the eyes never lie, Poirot replied. Nor do the hands. Watch closely how a hand holds a bow, the slightest tension or relaxation, it is the language of the soul. Madame d'Artois guided them to a quieter room for refreshments, a space adorned with paintings of past competitions and historical musical figures. Poirot's gaze lingered on a portrait of a long-dead maestro, noting the angle of the head, the intensity of the eyes, the subtle curl of the mouth that suggested both pride and secrecy. It is a most stimulating environment, he said, and yet, one senses undercurrents beneath the surface. There is more here than mere music, n'est-ce pas? Madame d'Artois studied him silently for a moment, then nodded. Indeed, Monsieur Poirot. There is ambition, rivalry, and, sometimes, shall I say, mischief. It is my hope that your presence will ensure fairness, for there are those who, let us say, value the prize above all else. Poirot smiled faintly. Ah! And it is here that one must look not only at the notes on the page, but at the hearts and minds behind them. Music is a language, yes, but also a mirror of the self. Observe, Hastings, observe, and you will see what others miss. A faint sound interrupted their conversation, the delicate, trembling notes of a violin, played softly in a corner. Poirot's gaze turned, and his sharp eyes fell on a young girl, perhaps 15, her face pale, fingers deftly moving across the strings. There was something fragile yet determined in her posture, something that suggested both fear and extraordinary talent. Poirot's mind, always alert, noted her every nuance. Ah, Hastings, he whispered, you see? Here is a student with more than mere technique, there is passion, and perhaps, hidden anxiety. One must wonder what secret she carries. As the morning sun rose higher over the conservatory, casting light upon the polished instruments and eager students, Poirot felt the familiar thrill that accompanies the promise of a new challenge. A mystery, subtle and elegant, awaited. And in the hands of a detective with a mind as precise as a metronome, it was certain to unfold with both sophistication and surprise. Outside, the countryside stretched in calm green expanses, seemingly untouched by discord. Inside, however, Poirot sensed that under the surface of music and etiquette, ambition, envy, and secrets had already begun their intricate dance. And he, Hercule Poirot, was ready to watch every step. Chapter 2, A Prelude of Suspicion. The morning after his arrival at the Harmony Conservatory, Hercule Poirot awoke to a world vibrating with subtle tension. The sun had barely risen, yet the air already hummed with anticipation, as though the walls themselves were aware of the impending competition. Poirot, of course, did not merely hear or see, he observed. Every sound, every flicker of light, every nuance of posture told him more than the spoken word ever could. After a brief breakfast of tea and precisely buttered toast, he strolled through the marble-floored corridors with Captain Hastings. Students in practice rooms were already immersed in their exercises, the sound of scales, arpeggios, and etudes filling the halls in a cacophony that seemed to thrill Poirot rather than irritate him. Mon ami, he murmured, eyes narrowing as he passed a particular room. Observe the subtle variations in bowing technique, the tension in the shoulders, the slight hesitation at certain high notes. These are not merely errors, they are the footprints of emotion, the traces of a mind perturbed. Something tells me that the true measure of a musician's talent is not in their skill alone but in what they hide behind it. Hastings jotted down notes with a mixture of admiration and confusion. You can deduce all that just from the way someone plays a few notes. Poirot smiled faintly, tapping the side of his wax moustache. Mais oui, mon ami. Every movement, every glance, every pause is meaningful. One must only possess the patience to notice. Their path took them past the central display case. The Stradivarius rested there, gleaming under the soft morning light, as if aware of the watchful eyes upon it. Poirot leaned slightly closer, inspecting the glass for fingerprints or smudges that might betray careless handling, or worse. A subtle act of preparation. Nothing seemed amiss, yet his instinct prickled with the certainty that the instrument was the fulcrum upon which something far more complex would pivot. Notice, Hastings, he whispered, how even the students who do not pass near it still glance at it. Reverence, yes, but also apprehension. Ah! The Stradivarius carries not only notes, but fear, ambition, and temptation. It was during the first formal rehearsal that Poirot's attentions were truly engaged. The room was expansive, with polished wooden floors reflecting the sunlight in patterns as intricate as the finest musical compositions. Students were grouped according to their skill levels, and one by one they were called to perform, each piece more demanding than the last. Poirot's eyes, however, were drawn less to the notes than to the performers themselves. A girl with dark hair, Emily St. Clair, played with astonishing delicacy, yet her hands trembled slightly on the higher notes. Poirot noted the flicker of her eyes whenever a teacher's gaze fell upon her, the subtle way her fingers lingered on the violin scroll before adjusting it. Every movement, though seemingly trivial, spoke volumes to him. Observe her, Poirot whispered to Hastings. Not her mistakes, but her reactions. She fears something, yes, but what? Ah, it is as if the very presence of the Stradivarius reminds her of danger. Hastings frowned. Danger? It's a violin, Poirot, not a tiger. Poirot's lips curved in a knowing smile. Ah, but mon ami, what is danger but the perception of loss, of ambition thwarted, of pride injured? In the hands of humans, the most harmless object may become an instrument of fear or desire. As the day progressed, the detective continued his quiet observations. There was Theo Marston, a confident, arrogant young man whose every glance seemed to challenge his rivals. There was Lydia Vale, petite and timid, who avoided eye contact with anyone, yet whose fingers moved over the strings with extraordinary precision. Each student was a study in contradictions, confidence masking insecurity, gentleness concealing ambition, anxiety camouflaged as decorum. Poirot's attention was also drawn to the staff. The caretakers moved with a precision that suggested long familiarity with both the students and the instruments, yet there were small inconsistencies, a footprint slightly smudged near the display case, a key jingling subtly as a door opened and closed, a glance exchanged between two instructors that was unusually fleeting. None of these details alone would suffice, yet together, they formed a lattice of subtle signs, a web awaiting analysis. During a brief interlude, Poirot was invited by Madame Claudine d'Artois to inspect the rehearsal hall from a more private vantage point. She spoke in a voice measured yet tinged with concern. Monsieur Poirot, you will observe, I hope, the integrity of our proceedings. The scholarship is not merely a prize, it is a promise. And yet, she paused, her hands tightening slightly around the edge of a piano. There are tensions. Rivalries. Perhaps even underhanded attempts to influence the outcome. I pray that your presence will prevent such matters. Poirot inclined his head slightly, absorbing every subtle inflection in her voice, every nuance of expression. Madam, it is true that ambition often clouds the judgment. Yet the heart betrays itself through the smallest gestures, a glance, a hesitation, the manner in which one touches an object. I will observe, and I will understand. Hastings, watching Poirot with fascination, whispered, "Do you always manage to read people so easily?" Poirot shook his head. "Not always, mon ami. But one must always pay attention. Observe what is omitted as carefully as what is spoken. A violin played poorly, a note missed, a hand trembling, these are but reflections of the inner mind. And the inner mind, Hastings, often conceals secrets even from itself." As the afternoon rehearsals drew to a close, Poirot returned once more to the Stradivarius. He examined it closely, noting the polished varnish, the subtle wear on the scroll, the delicate etchings near the bridge. To the casual observer, it was merely a beautiful instrument, priceless yet static. To Poirot, however, it was a symbol, a potential catalyst for desire, jealousy, and intrigue. "Ah, mon ami," he said, turning to Hastings, "this is no ordinary competition. There are forces at work beneath the surface. One must watch closely, listen attentively, and trust nothing, except, perhaps, the instinct, the little grey cells, which, in due course, will reveal all." A soft murmur of voices drifted from the practice rooms as students began to gather their instruments. Poirot's eyes lingered on Emily St. Clair, still adjusting her bow, her hands betraying the slightest tremor. The detective's mind, ever alert, catalogued every detail, stored every glance, every sigh, every subtle motion. He was aware, with that uncanny certainty that only he possessed, that something was quietly stirring, an event that would disturb the serene harmony of the academy and test both skill and morality. And so, as the sun began to dip toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the polished wooden floors, Hercule Poirot, master of observation and decipherer of the human heart, prepared himself. He sensed that the Stradivarius, gleaming and seemingly untouchable, would soon vanish from its rightful place. And when it did, he alone would be ready to untangle the web of ambition, fear, and deception that would inevitably follow. Chapter 3: The Disappearance. The morning of the recital dawned crisp and bright, yet the atmosphere within the Harmony Conservatory was far from serene. Even as sunlight poured through the tall windows, the air seemed charged with a quiet apprehension, as though the students themselves sensed that the day would not unfold according to expectation. Poirot, with his ever-impeccable suit and waxed moustache, arrived early, moving with measured steps across the polished floors. "Observe, Hastings," Poirot murmured, "how even the most confident among them walk with a touch of hesitation. Ah! There is something in the air, a note slightly out of harmony." Hastings, following closely with notebook in hand, glanced at the students, all busy with last-minute tuning or whispered consultations with their instructors. "You think someone might try something today?" he asked. Poirot smiled faintly, his eyes fixed on the central display case. "Not think, mon ami. I know. Something has been planned. The instrument at the center, that Stradivarius, is both prize and temptation. And temptation, Hastings, is the most persuasive of all forces." Madame Claudine D'Artois was already in the recital hall, greeting students and staff with her usual composure, yet Poirot noted a subtle crease in her brow, barely perceptible, betraying her anxiety. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, inclining her head, "the scholarship prize is displayed as always. I trust the day will pass without incident." Poirot's dark eyes flicked to the case. "Madam, one can never be certain. But let us observe, n'est-ce pas? Human desire is unpredictable. And it is in unpredictability that intrigue thrives." The students gathered, each adjusting their instruments with meticulous care, bows gliding across strings, producing an almost fragile harmony. Poirot's attention, as always, was divided between the music and the performers. Emily St. Clair, the pale, timid prodigy, seemed unusually fidgety today, her fingers trembling slightly as she tuned her violin. Theo Marston, on the other hand, strode confidently to his place, shoulders squared, every movement exuding the arrogance of assured superiority. The rehearsal began smoothly, each student performing their assigned piece in turn. Poirot noted inconsistencies in performance that were far more revealing than mere mistakes, a finger hesitating on a note, a student glancing toward the case more often than necessary, a whispered comment exchanged between two rivals. Small gestures, easily overlooked by others, spoke volumes to the detective. During a brief interlude, Poirot decided to inspect the display case. He approached it slowly, eye scanning for the minutest irregularity. And then, he froze. The Stradivarius was gone. His heart, ordinarily so measured, gave a faint jolt, and he bent closer to inspect the glass. No broken locks. No shattered panes. No indication of force. Yet the instrument itself, priceless, delicate, and irreplaceable, had vanished. Hastings, who had been observing from a few steps away, came rushing over. "By Jove, Poirot! Are you certain?" he exclaimed, eyes wide with disbelief. Poirot nodded slowly, his hands clasped behind his back. "Absolument, mon ami. It is gone. And notice, the case is undisturbed. No fingerprints of intrusion. No sign of external tampering. Ah, but observe the faint smudge here, just below the lock. And this, a tiny scratch along the base. Someone was careful, yes, but not careful enough for me to miss it." A murmur of shock rippled through the students as the news spread. Emily St. Clair covered her mouth with both hands, eyes wide, while Theo Marston's confident expression faltered, a shadow of panic flickering across his face. Poirot's gaze swept the room, cataloguing every reaction with precise attention. Madame d'Artois, regaining her composure, called the students together. "This is most unfortunate," she said, her voice steady, though Poirot noted the tension in her grip on the lectern. "The Stradivarius has vanished. I must ask everyone to remain calm. Monsieur Poirot, I trust you will assist us in understanding how such a thing could occur?" Poirot inclined his head. "Mais oui, madame. Let us consider, first, what is observable." He gestured subtly to the students. "And then, we shall attend to the human element. Observe the faces, the gestures, the hesitation in words. It is in these details that truth hides." He began questioning students individually, carefully noting their reactions. Some were genuinely shocked, their words halting, hands wringing. Others appeared more composed, their stories precise, perhaps rehearsed. Theo Marston, when approached, claimed to have been practicing near the far window, unaware of anything unusual. Emily St. Clair, on the other hand, was almost too eager to assert that she had been entirely alone in the corner, keeping her instrument properly tuned. Poirot's eyes, dark and calculating, observed every nuance. "Ah," he whispered to Hastings, "notice the small discrepancies, Theo's hesitation when asked the color of his music folder, Emily's avoidance of my gaze. Ah. And the caretaker, who appears calm, yet clutches the keys a fraction too tightly. These are threads, mon ami, threads we must follow." Next, Poirot examined the display case more closely. The lock, a complex brass mechanism, showed no signs of tampering. The faint smudge suggested that someone had touched it carefully, perhaps to manipulate the glass or test the mechanism. Yet the absence of any external disturbance indicated that the thief had intimate knowledge of both the instrument and the room itself. Madame d'Artois approached, voice tense. "Monsieur Poirot, this is most perplexing. Who could possibly have the skill or knowledge to remove the Stradivarius without leaving a trace?" Poirot's expression was serene, almost amused. "Ah, madam, you see, it is never the force that is most telling, but the subtlety. The thief is careful, yes, but carefulness itself leaves clues. A glance too long, a hand too steady, the tiniest mark on the floor. And, of course, there is motive. One does not steal such an instrument merely for the pleasure of it. Throughout the afternoon, Poirot continued his observations. The students were restless, their rivalries intensifying under the shadow of suspicion. Small, almost imperceptible gestures, whispered comments, pointed looks, nervous shifts of weight, revealed the psychological dynamics at play. Hastings, exhausted from note-taking, could only marvel at Poirot's uncanny ability to perceive what others overlooked. By evening, the recital hall had been thoroughly searched. No trace of the Stradivarius was found. Yet Poirot remained calm, almost serene. He moved among the students and staff, noting every micro-expression, cataloguing every inconsistency. Somewhere, hidden in plain sight, lay the clues that would reveal the identity of the thief. As he observed Emily staring nervously at the empty display case, Poirot murmured to Hastings, "Mon ami, the stage is set. The players are in position." And as always, the human heart, greedy, fearful, ambitious, will tell us the story, if only we listen carefully. He paused, hands clasped behind his back, eyes scanning the hall with meticulous precision. "Patience, Hastings. Soon, we shall unravel the method and the motive. But first, one must understand the players." And so, as the sun set over the serene Wiltshire countryside, the Harmony Conservatory was cloaked in quiet turmoil. The Stradivarius, once untouchable and gleaming, had vanished. And within the minds of students and staff alike, suspicion, fear, and ambition stirred in ways that promised both intrigue and revelation. Hercule Poirot, ever observant, ever patient, knew that the theft was only the beginning. The true mystery lay not in the disappearance of an instrument, but in the human heart that had orchestrated it, and the subtle, almost invisible clues that would ultimately lead him to the truth. Chapter 4: Crescendo of Red Herrings. The morning after the disappearance, the Harmony Conservatory felt unnaturally heavy, as though the very walls were aware of the turmoil within. Students moved cautiously, eyes darting to the empty display case, whispers circulating like faint, persistent echoes. Even the sunlight streaming through the tall windows seemed hesitant, filtered through curtains that were only partially drawn. Poirot arrived early, stepping into the recital hall with his customary poise, hands clasped behind his back. Hastings followed, notebook in hand, eager but already overwhelmed by the maze of subtle tensions. Poirot's eyes, sharp and calculating, swept across the room. "Mon ami," he murmured, "observe. Each student behaves as though under a microscope, yet each hopes their anxiety is invisible. This is precisely when the truth begins to reveal itself, not in what is said, but in what is withheld." The first interviews commenced. Poirot began with Theo Marston, whose confident facade had faltered slightly since the discovery of the missing Stradivarius. Theo claimed to have been practicing near a far window, but Poirot noticed a subtle hesitation when asked about the exact location of his music folder during that time. His fingers drummed lightly against the stand, betraying an unconscious nervousness. "And you did not see anyone near the display case?" Poirot asked, voice calm but precise. Theo's eyes flickered toward the empty case. "No, Monsieur Poirot. I was practicing, as I said. I didn't look." Poirot inclined his head slightly, storing the moment in his mental catalogue. Very well. We shall see." Next was Emily St. Clair, whose nervous demeanor had grown more pronounced since the previous day. She insisted she had been alone, absorbed in her own practice, and that she had not approached the case. Yet Poirot observed how her eyes continually flicked to the display, her fingers lingering on the violin scroll as though drawing courage from its memory. "Ah, mademoiselle," Poirot said softly, "fear often disguises itself as innocence. One must always consider not only what is done, but what is intended. You understand." Emily nodded quickly, lips pressed tightly together, a faint tremor betraying the anxiety she tried to mask. The third interview introduced a new layer of intrigue, the caretaker, Mr. Harding. Poirot noted the man's overly steady hands as he carried a set of keys, his eyes briefly avoiding the detective's gaze. "I was simply tending to the instruments, monsieur," Harding insisted, though Poirot caught the slight twitch at the corner of his mouth, a subtle sign of either guilt or concealed knowledge. Poirot made no immediate comment. Instead, he moved on, observing Lydia Vale, the timid student whose precision in playing contrasted sharply with her social reticence. Lydia's voice was low, almost hesitant, but Poirot noticed a spark of defiance when she claimed she had heard nothing unusual, despite having been near the hall during the disappearance. "Ah," Poirot murmured to Hastings, "sometimes courage hides behind silence, sometimes behind deception. The challenge is to know which is which." As the morning wore on, the detective assembled a map of possibilities in his mind. Each student, each member of staff, and even the wealthy patron who had lingered near the rehearsal hall the previous day became a piece of the puzzle. Yet the threads were tangled, and some deliberately misleading. Red herrings began to emerge almost immediately. Theo's overt arrogance and subtle jealousy made him an obvious suspect, though Poirot suspected his guilt might be only apparent, not actual. Emily's nervous energy seemed suspicious. Yet her anxiety could equally indicate fear of being falsely accused. The caretaker's furtive movements hinted at concealment, but Poirot was not yet convinced of wrongdoing. Hastings, clearly frustrated, whispered, "Poirot, it seems everyone has motive and everyone looks guilty. How do you possibly begin to untangle this mess?" Poirot's eyes twinkled. "Patience, mon ami. One must watch not only for what is done, but for what is inconsistent with character. The key is not in the obvious, but in the subtle, almost imperceptible discrepancies." By midday, Poirot had devised a subtle test. He asked the students to participate in a group rehearsal, suggesting a new arrangement of their pieces. As they played, he observed reactions carefully, the nervous glance, the quick adjustment of a music stand, a faint exhale that betrayed relief or frustration. Small, seemingly insignificant gestures became statements of intent. It was during this rehearsal that an incident occurred which, at first glance, appeared unrelated to the theft. Emily's bow broke mid-performance. She gasped, her hands trembling, and for a moment, the hall filled with scattered notes and murmurs. Hastings leaned toward Poirot. "Do you think this is connected?" Poirot's dark eye studied Emily. "Not directly, mon ami. Yet observe, her reaction is telling. She fears attention, she fears blame, yet she continues. Sometimes, accidents reveal the character more clearly than deliberate acts. One must notice the subtleties." Meanwhile, a whispered confrontation between Theo Marston and Lydia Vale added another layer of complexity. Hastings caught fragments, "I didn't touch it." "You think I would?" Everyone suspects someone. Their exchange, though cryptic, revealed the simmering tension that Poirot knew could mask truth or mislead entirely. In the afternoon, Poirot requested a closer examination of the empty display case. He studied the lock, noting the faint smudge and the slight scratch, while Hastings documented the scene. "No signs of forced entry," Poirot said. "Ah, but the absence of violence does not preclude the possibility of skill, ingenuity, and knowledge. One can remove an object without breaking a window, without picking a lock, and yet leave traces so delicate only the most attentive eye can detect." Poirot then turned his attention to the wealthy patron, Mr. Alastair Pennington, who had spent the morning observing the students. His interest was particularly focused on Emily and Theo, and Poirot noticed the faint twitch of his eyebrows whenever the student's eyes met his. "Patrons often influence ambition," Poirot said softly to Hastings, "sometimes even manipulate opportunity. Watch him carefully." By evening, the detective had gathered a web of observations, inconsistencies, and behavioral anomalies. Yet the true picture remained elusive. Each new clue seemed to complicate rather than clarify. Red herrings proliferated, Theo's arrogance, Emily's nervousness, Lydia's subtle defiance, the caretaker's furtive glance, the patron's calculated attention. Poirot, seated in the empty recital hall as the last rays of sunlight fell across the polished wood, spoke quietly to Hastings. "Mon ami, the human heart is the most intricate of instruments. And just as a violin's sound depends on precise pressure and delicate balance, so too does the revelation of truth depend on the careful observation of each human gesture. Patience. Observation. Analysis. These are our tools." Hastings, exhausted yet fascinated, nodded. "And soon, Poirot, you'll know who took it." Poirot's expression was serene, almost amused. "Not yet, Hastings. But soon. One must always allow the facts to arrange themselves. And when they do, then the truth will sing as clearly as the finest concerto." Outside, the countryside of Wiltshire stretched in calm, deceptive serenity. Inside, the Harmony Conservatory was a stage for ambition, envy, and subtle intrigue. And at the center of it all, invisible yet palpably present, lay the missing Stradivarius, the object of desire, fear, and the catalyst for the mystery that Hercule Poirot had been summoned to resolve. Chapter 5: Secret Harmonies. The morning after the discovery of the missing Stradivarius, the Harmony Conservatory was quiet, almost unnervingly so. The students arrived with downcast eyes, whispers barely audible, each carrying the weight of suspicion that hung like a heavy fog over the polished floors. Poirot, as always, arrived early, his hands clasped behind his back, eyes sharp, alert, and calculating. "Mon ami," he murmured to Hastings as they walked through the hall, "observe. Fear is an instrument in itself, capable of producing the most discordant emotions. And ambition, equally, can strike louder than any note. Today, we shall listen not merely to music, but to the secrets beneath it." The first order of business, Poirot decided, was the archives. The Harmony Conservatory had existed for over a century, and its records were a rich repository of history, rivalry, and, occasionally, scandal. The librarian, a bespectacled woman named Miss Aldridge, led them to a room filled with leather-bound volumes, each chronicling competitions, prizes, and notable alumni. Poirot's eyes gleamed as he opened the first volume, noting entries dating back decades. Hastings, see here. The Stradivarius is no ordinary instrument. It has a long history of disappearance and reappearance. Often, it is not theft for monetary gain, but for power, influence, and, occasionally, revenge. Hastings peered over his shoulder. Revenge? Over a violin. Poirot's lips curved in a faint smile. Mais oui, mon ami. The heart is easily inflamed. The loss of such an instrument can provoke feelings far more intense than one might imagine. Now, let us examine patterns. Observe, every incident involved someone close to the academy, someone with knowledge of the routines, the rooms, and the students. The thief must be both cunning and intimate with the surroundings. Poirot spent the morning poring over records, noting names, dates, and motives. He began to see subtle patterns, students who had suddenly left the academy under unexplained circumstances, patrons who had withdrawn donations only to return years later, and teachers whose careers had flourished after a sudden vacancy in competition results. It was a web of ambition, envy, and quiet manipulation. By mid-morning, Poirot requested that the students rehearse individually once more. His eyes, dark and penetrating, swept the room, noting not the music itself, but the human behavior surrounding it. Emily St. Clair, her hand still trembling slightly, played with delicate precision. Poirot observed the faint hesitation before certain passages, the small tremor in her left hand, and the way her eyes occasionally flicked toward the empty display case. Theo Marston, as always confident, performed with bravado, yet Poirot noticed the subtle tension in his shoulders, a micro-expression of anxiety as if he feared judgment even beyond the audience's eyes. And Lydia Vale, the quiet observer, moved with perfect poise, yet her lips twitched as she glanced at the staff members, suggesting hidden knowledge or perhaps a secret fear. Poirot made notes of every nuance. "Observe, Hastings," he whispered, "the invisible symphony of gestures. The smallest action often carries the weight of motive." After the rehearsals, Poirot requested private conversations with the staff. He spoke first to the caretaker, Mr. Harding. "You have worked here many years," Poirot said, his tone calm, almost indulgent. "Tell me, have there been prior incidents with the Stradivarius?" Harding shifted slightly, fingers brushing the keys he always carried. "A few times, monsieur. But nothing serious. Just misunderstandings, mostly. Students taking liberties, some patrons with strong opinions." "Ah, but each incident, no matter how minor, leaves a trace," Poirot noted. "And knowledge of these traces can be persuasive." Next, Poirot spoke to one of the teachers, a stern man named Mr. Carlyle, whose eyes seemed perpetually narrowed. "It is said that the Stradivarius is often coveted not just for its music, but for prestige," Poirot observed. "Do you think that today, someone's ambition might outweigh caution?" Carlyle hesitated, then shook his head. "We teach discipline, Monsieur Poirot." "But yes. Some students, perhaps, yes, ambition can cloud judgment." Poirot's gaze lingered. "Ambition, when combined with opportunity, can produce actions most inventive. And the heart, mon ami, often acts before the mind can object." The detective then turned to Mr. Alastair Pennington, the wealthy patron whose presence had been particularly noticeable since Poirot's arrival. The man was composed, polished, and polite, yet Poirot observed the subtle narrowing of his eyes whenever Emily or Theo entered a room. "Mr. Pennington," Poirot said smoothly, "your interest in the Stradivarius is evident. Pray, do you believe that desire justifies intervention, perhaps even influence over events?" Pennington's smile was courteous but firm. "Desire is not theft, Monsieur Poirot. An intervention, well, one does hope for fairness, even if opportunity presents itself." Poirot's eyes twinkled with understanding. "Ah, fairness is a noble goal, yet ambition sometimes whispers otherwise. One must always consider not only intent, but the subtle traces of action. The little clues that betray thought before deed." As the afternoon progressed, Poirot began piecing together the web of psychological motives. Emily's fear suggested a student aware of prior incidents, perhaps someone tempted by opportunity but constrained by conscience. Theo's arrogance hinted at envy and impatience, though not necessarily guilt. Lydia's quiet observation suggested a hidden knowledge, perhaps witness, perhaps conspirator. And the staff, from the meticulous caretaker to the teachers with years of experience, all had access, knowledge, and opportunity. Poirot also examined the empty display case once more, tracing the faint smudge near the lock and the scratch along the base. These tiny details, almost invisible to others, told him that the thief had intimate familiarity with the instrument and the room itself. It was not a crime of impulse, but of careful planning. By evening, Poirot gathered Hastings in a quiet corner of the hall. "Mon ami, the heart of this mystery lies not only in what has been done, but in what is hidden. Each suspect possesses a motive, yet each acts differently under pressure. One must observe not only gestures, but the subtle patterns of human behavior. Desire, fear, pride, all play in harmony or discord." Hastings sighed, exhausted by the complexity of the puzzle. "And do you know who took it?" Poirot shook his head, serene as ever. "Not yet, Hastings. But the threads are visible. Soon each will reveal itself, as naturally as a note resolves in a chord. Patience, observation, and analysis, these are the tools of truth. And the Stradivarius, like a perfect instrument, shall sing again, under the guidance of the little grey cells. Outside, the Wiltshire countryside lay bathed in gold, deceptively tranquil. Inside the conservatory, ambition, fear, and subtle intrigue continued their intricate dance, hidden behind polished instruments and polite smiles. And at the heart of it all remained the missing Stradivarius, silent but ever-present, a magnet for desire and a catalyst for revelation. Poirot, his eyes dark and penetrating, observed each player on this delicate stage, certain that the day's secrets would gradually reveal themselves. And when they did, the harmony of truth would emerge, clear and unassailable. Chapter 6: Discord Among Shadows. The day following Poirot's extensive investigations opened with a palpable tension that clung to every corner of the Harmony Conservatory. The students arrived punctually, yet there was none of the usual quiet enthusiasm that accompanied morning practice. Even the polished wooden floors seemed to absorb the unease rather than reflect it. Poirot, as always, arrived early, his movements precise, hands clasped behind his back, eyes dark and alert. Hastings, fatigued but ever curious, followed. "Poirot," he murmured, "the atmosphere is worse than yesterday. I swear I could cut the tension with a knife." "Ah, mon ami," Poirot replied, "tension is a language. One must merely learn to read it. And today, I intend to hear every word it speaks." The morning began with individual rehearsals, each student performing under Poirot's meticulous gaze. Emily St. Clair approached her piece with quiet determination, but Poirot noted the tremor in her left hand and the almost imperceptible glances toward the empty Stradivarius display case. Hastings whispered, "She seems genuinely terrified." "Perhaps, Captain," Poirot replied softly, "but it is not fear alone that guides the human heart. Observe the precise manner in which she corrects her posture after a misplayed note. Ah! Discipline and anxiety combined, both tell a story, yes, but only if one listens." Theo Marston, confident as ever, played his section with apparent ease, though Poirot noticed a tension in the curl of his fingers and the slight furrow of his brow. "He is aware," Poirot murmured, "that suspicion has shifted toward him. Yet the manner in which one displays confidence under scrutiny is often more revealing than an outright confession." Poirot then called the students together for a group exercise, instructing them to pair and rehearse short duets. This, he knew, would force interaction, revealing alliances, rivalries, and perhaps hidden guilt. Subtle behaviors emerged immediately. Lydia Vale hesitated before choosing her partner. Emily seemed to shrink slightly when paired with Theo, and Theo's arrogance sparked a whispered argument with a fellow student over sheet music. "Ah, mon ami," Poirot said quietly to Hastings, "observe these fractures. Human nature does not conceal itself when under subtle pressure. Notice how envy whispers, how fear prompts caution, and how pride can provoke deception." During the rehearsal, Poirot observed an unusual pattern. A young student, Frederick Langley, positioned near the far wall, appeared unusually calm, almost detached. Yet Poirot noticed him repeatedly casting quick, covert glances toward the empty display case. His movements were slight, almost imperceptible, but Poirot's trained eye detected the subtle choreography of curiosity, caution, and suppressed excitement. After rehearsals, Poirot requested a private meeting with the staff. He spoke first to the caretaker, Mr. Harding. "You have access to all rooms," Poirot observed, "yet yesterday you claimed to see nothing unusual. I wonder, mon ami, can one truly be unaware when opportunity presents itself?" Harding's hands tightened around his keys. I only ensure the instruments are safe. I would never touch." Poirot raised a hand delicately. "Ah, yes. And yet, one does not need to touch to know or to observe. One merely needs attention, and it seems, Captain Hastings, that attention was paid." Next, Poirot questioned Mr. Carlyle, the teacher. "Discipline is central to the academy," Poirot said, yet ambition can override discipline. OUI. Carlyle's jaw tightened. Indeed, monsieur. Some students, especially the most gifted, feel entitled. Yet none would dare steal the Stradivarius. Poirot's eyes, dark and penetrating, lingered on Carlyle. Perhaps, or perhaps they are confident in their discretion. Confidence itself can be dangerous, n'est-ce pas? Poirot then turned to Emily, arranging a subtle psychological test. Mademoiselle St. Clair, he said, tell me, what would you do if a student, driven by desire, had the opportunity to handle the Stradivarius unsupervised? Emily's fingers trembled as she replied, I would never. I suppose some might, if they. She stopped abruptly, caught between truth and fear. Poirot's eyes twinkled. Her hesitation was revealing. She knew the consequences of theft but understood, on some level, the temptation it posed to others. Hastings leaned in quietly. You think she knows something, Poirot? Ah, mon ami, she knows enough to fear suspicion, and fear can be more enlightening than confession. One must watch how she reacts to the suggestion of temptation. Observe, there is honesty in her hesitation, yet also caution. Both are informative. Poirot's attention next turned to Theo Marston. He posed a similar hypothetical, and you, Monsieur Marston, how would one resist opportunity if it arose, one of great reward, with no eyes upon you? Theo's confidence wavered slightly. He hesitated, fingers tapping rhythmically on his violin case. I suppose it would depend on the circumstances. His eyes flicked involuntarily toward the empty display case. Poirot noted the micro-expression of desire and rationalization, a subtle clue, but not definitive guilt. By mid-afternoon, tensions among the students had reached a peak. A whispered quarrel erupted between Lydia Vale and Frederick Langley, drawing the attention of several staff members. Poirot observed quietly, noting the precise timing of gestures, the avoidance of eye contact, and the almost imperceptible micro-smile that crossed Frederick's face as Lydia flustered under scrutiny. Interesting, Poirot murmured. Notice, Hastings, how deception is layered with human emotion. Anger, embarrassment, fear, all can mask or reveal truth. One must distinguish the intention from the reaction, and the reaction from the act. Poirot also implemented a subtle trap. He asked the students to recount, in detail, their movements during the previous day, without prior warning of why. Some faltered immediately, offering inconsistent accounts or omitting moments altogether. Others, like Lydia, appeared composed yet slightly evasive. Emily's voice shook, her timeline almost too precise, as though rehearsed to avoid suspicion. Theo, predictably, offered overly confident descriptions, yet Poirot noted minor discrepancies in timing and direction. Later, Poirot gathered Hastings and spoke quietly. Mon ami, observe how stress fractures not only the guilty, but the innocent. Each student, each staff member, is like a note in a chord. Alone, insignificant, together, they form patterns. Patterns, yes, but also dissonances, which reveal themselves only to the trained ear. Hastings frowned. And the thief? Have you any idea who it might be? Poirot smiled faintly. Patience, Hastings. The key is not to rush, but to observe. The method is subtle, the motive hidden, layered with pride, fear, and opportunity. We must await the moment when the human heart, under gentle pressure, betrays itself. And when it does, he tapped his temple. The little grey cells will have their answer. As evening fell over Wiltshire, the conservatory seemed even more like a stage, with ambition, envy, and fear performing an intricate ballet. Outside, the countryside remained calm and unchanging, but within the polished halls, tension hummed like a taut string. Poirot, ever composed, moved quietly among the students and staff, cataloguing subtle gestures, noting inconsistencies, and storing every observation. He knew that soon a fracture would appear, an inadvertent reveal, a micro-expression, a slip of the tongue. And when it did, the mystery of the vanished Stradivarius would begin to unravel. The stage was set. The players, now strained under suspicion, were dancing a delicate, invisible waltz of deception, each step a potential clue. And at the center of it all, the detective waited, patient, serene, confident that the crescendo of truth would soon arrive. Chapter 7. The tension reaches a crescendo. The morning air over the Harmony Conservatory was crisp and clear, yet inside the hall, an invisible storm had gathered. The disappearance of the Stradivarius had cast a long shadow over the students and staff, and the subtle tensions Poirot had been observing for days were now escalating into something almost tangible. Whispers followed footsteps. Glances lingered too long or vanished too quickly. Every action, every hesitation, was a potential clue. Poirot arrived early, as was his custom, moving with deliberate precision. His dark eye swept over the hall, cataloguing micro-expressions, gestures, and postures. Hastings followed, notebook in hand, already overwhelmed by the intricate web of human behavior. "Mon ami," Poirot murmured, "the stage is now fully set. Observe how fear sharpens the mind, yet often clouds judgment. Each of these young musicians dances between truth and deception. Soon, the melody of reality will reveal itself." The day began with individual rehearsals, ostensibly to prepare for the delayed recital. Emily St. Clair entered first, her steps hesitant yet measured. Poirot watched her every move, the subtle quiver of her fingers, the faint tightening of her jaw, the almost imperceptible glance toward the empty Stradivarius display case. Her anxiety was evident, yet beneath it, a thread of determination remained. She would not let suspicion crush her entirely. Theo Marston followed, his confidence outwardly intact, though Poirot noted a tension in his shoulders and the slight tightening around his eyes whenever a staff member entered the hall. He played with bravado, but it was a performance designed not only to showcase skill, but to mask unease. Poirot catalogued every micro-expression, aware that pride and fear often betray more than they conceal. Hastings whispered, "Poirot, do you think either of them could be the thief?" Poirot's lips curved in a faint, enigmatic smile. "Perhaps, mon ami. But one must not be misled by the obvious. Often, guilt hides behind innocence, and innocence can be shrouded in guilt's guise." Poirot then called a small gathering of students and staff, ostensibly for a discussion about rehearsal schedules, yet it served a subtler purpose, to observe interactions under pressure. He posed a seemingly simple question: suppose a valuable instrument were left unattended, and one had the opportunity to move it. How might one behave? The reactions were immediate and telling. Emily's eyes widened slightly, her hands twisting nervously. Lydia Vale, quiet and composed, avoided direct eye contact but shifted her weight almost imperceptibly, suggesting inner agitation. Theo Marston's confident facade faltered, a flicker of tension betraying concern over how his words might be interpreted. Even the staff exchanged quick glances, subtle yet loaded with implication. Poirot observed it all, cataloguing each gesture and every hesitation. "Hastings," he whispered, "notice how instinct betrays the guilty before reason can intervene. Yet, equally, fear of accusation can unsettle the innocent. The challenge is to distinguish between the two." As the day progressed, Poirot set a more subtle psychological trap. He arranged for each student to handle their instruments in isolation, suggesting that the Stradivarius might need examination for tuning purposes. Though the violin itself remained missing, the notion of proximity to the object provoked reactions that were illuminating. Emily's hands trembled, yet she did not hesitate to approach the empty display case, almost as though drawn by both fear and curiosity. Poirot noted the precise way she touched the glass and examined the lock. Her caution revealed familiarity, but not necessarily complicity. Theo, by contrast, lingered unnecessarily, as though gauging how others reacted to his presence. Lydia appeared hesitant but observant, watching the responses of peers rather than focusing on the case itself. A sudden disruption occurred when Frederick Langley entered the hall, his face unusually flushed. He claimed to have found a piece of sheet music misplaced near the practice rooms. Yet Poirot noted that the music had been deliberately positioned to draw attention, almost a distraction. He catalogued Frederick's nervous glance toward the display case and the way he tapped his fingers against the folder, a subtle rhythm betraying concealed thoughts. Poirot called Hastings aside. "Mon ami, the human heart often performs its own symphony. Observe the rhythms, the hesitations, the overcompensations. Each is a note, and together they form the melody of intent." Mid-afternoon, the tension among the students escalated further. An argument erupted between Theo and Lydia over rehearsal assignments. Words were exchanged too quickly for content, yet Poirot detected the underlying currents: resentment, fear, and subtle manipulation. Emily, standing slightly apart, appeared agitated but restrained herself, the tension in her body a silent confession of anxiety. Poirot's attention shifted to the staff. Mr. Carlyle, normally composed, exhibited signs of agitation whenever students mentioned the Stradivarius. Mr. Harding, the caretaker, fidgeted subtly, adjusting the keys in his hand far more frequently than necessary. And Mr. Pennington, the patron, observed with keen interest, as though evaluating each student's moral fiber rather than musical skill. Poirot called an impromptu meeting of the staff in a side room, ostensibly to discuss rehearsal schedules, but in reality to observe reactions to indirect questioning. "Monsieur Harding," Poirot began, "you have knowledge of the instrument's routines. Do you ever wonder what one might do if opportunity presents itself?" Harding's fingers twitched around his keys, a minor but telling gesture. I ensure only that the instruments are safe. I would never misappropriate one," he stammered. And yet, Poirot observed softly, carefulness is often the mark of experience. But experience also teaches how to leave the faintest trace, one which the untrained eye might miss. "Ah, but I am not untrained." By evening, Poirot had gathered a substantial mental map of observations, inconsistencies, and human behavior. Every hesitation, glance, tremor, and adjustment was catalogued meticulously. Hastings, exhausted from note-taking and observation, whispered, "Poirot, do you think you're any closer to discovering the thief?" Poirot's expression was serene, almost amused. "Patience, mon ami. The final notes have not yet been struck." Today, the stage was set, the players revealed themselves under scrutiny. The guilty often betray themselves in subtle ways, tiny rhythms, gestures, and hesitations. Tomorrow, we shall see who falters when the pressure increases further. The sun set over the Wiltshire countryside, casting long shadows across the polished floors of the conservatory. Inside, tension hung like a heavy cord, vibrating with the possibility of revelation. Poirot, composed as ever, moved among the students and staff, eyes scanning every movement, recording every detail in the theatre of his mind. He knew that the climactic moment was approaching. One wrong step, one involuntary gesture, one hesitant glance could unravel the delicate web of deception. The Stradivarius, still missing, remained at the centre of ambition, fear, and desire. And Poirot, with his unparalleled patience and understanding of the human heart, awaited the moment when truth would finally reveal itself. As the night deepened, the Harmony Conservatory was a house of secrets, ambition, and unspoken rivalries. And at its heart, Poirot stood poised, confident that the crescendo of human emotion and subtle observation would soon culminate in revelation. Chapter 8: The Final Cadence. The morning sun poured over the Wiltshire countryside, but inside the Harmony Conservatory, an almost electric tension crackled. Students and staff had been summoned to the recital hall under the pretense of a rehearsal, yet Poirot's serene demeanor suggested that today would be decisive. Hastings whispered nervously beside him, "Poirot, do you really think we'll discover the thief today?" Poirot's dark eyes gleamed, the faintest hint of a smile playing on his lips. Mon ami, the hour of revelation approaches. The little grey cells have done their work. Now, all that remains is to allow the human heart to betray itself fully. Observe, and note carefully, the truth reveals itself not in words alone, but in gesture, hesitation, and glance. The hall had been arranged carefully. Chairs formed a semicircle around the empty display case. Students sat uneasily, exchanging wary glances, while the staff positioned themselves at the edges, their expressions polite yet strained. Poirot stepped to the centre, his presence commanding attention without effort. Mesdames et messieurs, he began, voice calm and deliberate, we are gathered not merely to play music, but to understand human nature. His gaze swept the room. Yesterday, the Stradivarius vanished. Today, the truth will emerge, like the final note in a symphony, clear, undeniable, and complete. He first addressed the students, his eyes lingering on Emily St. Clair. Mademoiselle, your fear is genuine, yet it is not the fear of guilt. Observe your gestures, the trembling of your hands, the way you check your own actions. This tells me much about your character, and little about the crime itself. Emily lowered her gaze, visibly relieved that Poirot acknowledged her integrity. Poirot turned to Theo Marston. Monsieur, your confidence is admirable, yet your reactions betrayed subtle unease yesterday. Desire, pride, ambition, all potent forces. Yet you did not steal the Stradivarius. Your fault is in overconfidence, not action. Theo's shoulders relaxed slightly, though his eyes were wary, waiting for the true culprit to be revealed. Hastings whispered, Poirot, if it's not Emily or Theo, who is it? Poirot raised a finger, signalling patience. Patience, mon ami. One must listen, observe, and note the cadence of human behavior. He then addressed the staff, beginning with the caretaker, Mr. Harding. Monsieur Harding, your access to the instruments is unmatched. Your knowledge of routines is precise. Yet your gestures yesterday, subtle as they were, suggested attention but not action. You observed, yes, but did not participate. Harding nodded, understanding Poirot's subtle compliment while maintaining his innocence. Poirot finally turned to Mr. Pennington, the patron. Monsieur, your interest in the Stradivarius has been pronounced. Yet your behavior reveals only evaluation, not interference. The subtle scrutiny, the quick assessment of each student, admirable, yet irrelevant to the crime itself. A hush fell over the hall as Poirot clasped his hands behind his back and began to speak more deliberately. Ah, Miss Amos, let us consider the one who remains, quietly present, almost invisible, yet consistently attentive. His gaze fell on Lydia Vale. The student sat stiffly, her composure intact, but her eyes betrayed a subtle flicker of awareness, a tiny betrayal. Lydia Vale, Poirot said softly, you observed the Stradivarius with a keen eye, noting its placement and the routine surrounding it. You have skill, precision, and caution, qualities necessary to approach such an instrument. But more importantly, you understood opportunity. You recognized a chance, and yet, you did not act out of greed or malice. Instead, you removed the violin, temporarily, not for theft, but for testing ambition, measuring reactions, and revealing character. Gasps filled the hall. Hastings exclaimed, you mean, she took it on purpose? Poirot inclined his head. OUI, Captain. And she did so with remarkable subtlety. Observe the traces, the faint smudge on the lock, the scratch along the case, deliberate yet delicate. She wished the Stradivarius to vanish, but not to disappear permanently. It was an experiment, a challenge to see who would be tempted, who would falter, and who would rise above ambition. Lydia's face flushed. I wanted to see who truly valued the music over the instrument itself, she admitted softly. I wanted to test my peers, to see who was honest, who was driven only by desire, and who could resist temptation. I did not intend harm. Poirot nodded, his expression both approving and understanding. Ah, mademoiselle, you have conducted a most delicate investigation. And in doing so, you have revealed not only the character of your peers, but also the subtle truths of human ambition. Yet even the most well-intentioned plan must be executed carefully, lest misjudgment occur. And so, I sought to observe, to guide, and to ensure that no unintended consequences would arise. He gestured gracefully, and Mr. Harding approached with a small, velvet-lined box. Inside rested the Stradivarius, unharmed and gleaming under the sunlight streaming through the windows. Lydia stepped forward, her hand steady now, placing the instrument back in its rightful place. Poirot addressed the entire assembly. Observe, Miss Amos, how human behavior responds under pressure. Desire, fear, ambition, each of these can compel action. Yet honesty, discipline, and courage reveal themselves in subtle gestures, in hesitation, and in choices made under observation. Today, we have seen a most instructive demonstration. The Stradivarius has returned, and in the process, we have learned far more than the location of a single instrument. Theo Marston, still astonished, shook his head. I can't believe it, all this time, we were being tested. Poirot inclined his head slightly. OUI, monsieur. Not every test is formal, not every lesson written. The heart of a musician is not measured merely by skill, but by character. And Lydia, in her own unconventional way, provided that lesson. Emily St. Clair let out a relieved sigh. So it wasn't me? And the violin wasn't truly stolen? Poirot smiled warmly. Non, mademoiselle. You acted honestly, and your conduct reflected integrity. The experiment revealed much, but it did not cause harm. And thus, the harmony of the conservatory has been restored, both to the music and to the human spirit. He turned to Hastings, eyes twinkling. And so, Captain, the little grey cells have observed, catalogued, and deduced. The mystery, seemingly complex and filled with misdirection, has a simple yet elegant resolution. Often, Miss Amos, the greatest lessons are hidden within the subtlest acts. One must observe not only what is done, but what is intended, what is feared, and what is resisted. As the students and staff absorbed the revelation, a new sense of respect and relief settled over the hall. The Stradivarius, restored to its rightful place, gleamed like a symbol of human ambition balanced by conscience. Lydia, the quiet orchestrator of the morning's intrigue, received no harsh judgment, only understanding and admiration for her ingenuity and insight. Poirot, his task complete, clasped his hands behind his back and surveyed the room one last time. Ah, Miss Amos, the truth is rarely in the obvious. It resides in the subtle, the hidden, the nearly imperceptible. And when one listens carefully, observes diligently, and applies reason with patience, the heart of any mystery is revealed. Hastings whispered as they left the hall, Poirot, it was brilliant. I never expected the thief to be testing everyone. Poirot's smile was serene, almost amused. Mon ami, human nature is the most intricate of instruments. And the greatest mysteries are those which reveal not only action, but character. Today, we have witnessed both, and the symphony of truth has played to its final note. The Wiltshire countryside lay bathed in golden light as they walked away, the conservatory behind them restored to quiet order. And within its polished halls, ambition, integrity, and curiosity had danced a delicate waltz, guided by the unparalleled insight of Hercule Poirot.